now. So welcome to all our guests at home around the world, wherever you are, to everyone who came in now. And good to see you again for those who've been here since the beginning of our event. I hope you can hear me well. Again, my name is Marvin Dörmchen. You're at the Insight Forum. I want to briefly talk about the Mind Foundation, what we do, and then, of course, we move on to our guest, Franz Vollenweider. So the Mind Foundation is here to do research, public education, and to bring psychedelic therapy into public healthcare. That's our mission. We are preparing a phase 3 trial for that now. So those of you who are clinicians, maybe can I see a show of hands? How many of you work in the medical or psychotherapeutic field? Okay, so if you want to get a medication or a treatment onto the market, you need to go through different phases in clinical research, from 1 to 3, and 3 being usually comparison studies where you compare a new treatment to an established one. And we have completed with our colleagues a phase 2 trial testing psilocybin, so the ingredient magic mushrooms, against placebo for treatment-resistant depression. This has been completed, data is being analyzed, and we're preparing now the Dimension trial, which will be a phase 3 trial. It's still a long way, especially fundraising, I think, is the main obstacle. And if that, or when that finally takes place and succeeds, then we can bring psychedelic therapy into public healthcare to have this a reimbursable treatment within 5 to 7 years, provided we manage to get the study happening. Okay, in the area of education, we do various things. We have an augmented psychotherapy training. We do psychedelic integration workshops that they're more in the area of personal development, harm reduction, and science communications. For that, we have a blog, memberships, etc. And most importantly, here tonight, the Insight Forum. This is our platform to talk to the public, to educate them about altered states of consciousness, psychedelic experiences from a variety of angles. Today, we'll hear from a clinical expert and a neuroscientist. We also invite speakers from the social sciences, from the humanities, and so on. Good, so how is the Insight Forum organized? That's the last slide too. We have these 3 segments. You already experienced the trans-rationale segment, in which we engage in contemplative practices. We try out different things. A lot of times we just do a meditation, look inwards, calm down, reflect. Today we had a sonic gong activation. Thank you, Isabella, that was wonderful. And all these methods in our eyes are epistemic practices. You look for insights inside. And you could say this is maybe just one side of the coin, another one being the scientific method. Both can be systemic quests for truth or for insight. And that's why we combine these contemplative practices with the second part, the rationale, how we call it, which is academic talks, discussions, etc. So today, I have the great honor of welcoming one of the true giants in psychedelic research, Professor Franz Vollenweider, who's with us tonight. He's the Swiss psychiatrist and neuroscientist who in the early 1990s reopened human psychedelic research and produced the first modern PET scans of psilocybin's effects on living brains in studies with healthy volunteers. Over the last 3 decades, he combined neuroimaging, pharmacology, and phenomenology to advance our understanding of the mechanisms underlying altered states of consciousness. His body of work now includes more than 300 peer-reviewed publications and has been cited over 26,000 times, shaping both basic and clinical research. His contribution to the field, however, extends beyond his own publications, of course, as he was the PhD supervisor for Matthias Lichty, for example. And in this way, he helped lay the foundation for the landmark MDMA research that began in the late 90s. Research that, like much of what Franz Vollenweider did, was only possible in Switzerland at the time. Today, we have a slightly different landscape. So now today, Professor Vollenweider serves as the co-director of the Center for Psychiatric Research and as head of the Neuropsychopharmacology and Brain Imaging Unit at the University Hospital of Psychiatry in Zurich. This is the historic Burg Hölzli, where healthy subjects and patients, and in some cases unwittingly, first received LSD in the 1940s. In all rights, his work carries forward the legacy of psychedelic research itself. Since the Mind Foundation was established in 2016, Professor Vollenweider has been a trusted advisor and ally in our cause, contributing his expertise, attending our conferences, and supporting our mission to bring psychedelic therapy into public healthcare and to build an ethical culture of consciousness. Now, finally, his research also expands beyond clinical applications. He has also explored how psychedelics interact with meditative practices. So tonight, he will share the latest on exactly this frontier in a presentation titled Insights at the Intersection of Psychedelics, Meditation and Neuroscience. So please join me in welcoming a pioneer who continues to expand the frontiers of consciousness research, Franz Vollenweider.
Thank you very much, Marvin, for a kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, back in Berlin. I would like to give you tonight a short overview of what we do in Zurich, how we started, give you some examples how we approach the self, because the self is one of my favorite questions. How is the brain established? The sense that we say, oh, I'm this and this, or that person, so that I can differentiate inside and outside. But this has to do with psychedelics, because psychedelics altered that self in a dramatic way. And that was one of the basic research questions I always had. So we have done a tremendous amount of studies, first into the pharmacology, because nothing was really explored in the 90s. Then we went into metabolism of the drug, useful for the clinic. Then dose response studies a lot. Then we went very early into neuroimaging. And in the same time, about the 90s, there was a Swiss Society for Psycholytic Therapy. That means taking rather lower doses, not very low, medium doses, but give it repeatedly to induce a process in patients. Contrary to the idea of the Americans really are favorite for is use a high dose once or twice and do a dramatic transformation. This is an idea going back to the 70s from some observational studies, more linked to the idea of humanistic psychology, that if you have a traumatic experience, your personality is going to change. But in a normal depressed patient, this is not like that. It's what we see is quite different. It is a process. So you have to be engaged with, you make an experience, but then you have to deal with that experience. So that's one of the favorite things. Now, I will talk today not too much about LSD, but about psilocybin, who was discovered by Hoffman in the early 60s. And came then into the clinic. We started to use it in 92, so we started with that. At the same time, we started to try to understand how do these drugs interact with neurons. What are the docking stations, like a key and a keyhole? How do they go into that? Which one are important? So a lot of things I'm gonna show you is just giving you a glimpse, an idea, not to go into technical details. It's not the idea. I will speak more than in the end about meditation and the combination. So the idea that psychedelics induce an altered state goes back to Huxley. Huxley was even several times with Hoffman in Switzerland discussing his experience with mescaline, where he wrote the famous book, The Doors of Perception. And I recently had a lot of interaction with Dana Sawyer in Switzerland, because we have a Huxley Institute in Zurich. And he reloaded the idea of the perennial philosophy. That means these states you can experience go transpersonal through different cultures. But it's not many people think Huxley thought it's a kind of religion, a religious state, meeting God. It's not exactly not that. And you find all that in this new book from this year. It's touching the ground of being instead of doing something, be in the state. So the other interesting person was Alan Watts, who made some combinations with Zen and psychedelics. But Watts was very tough. He said, when you got the message, hang up. That means he wasn't a friend of drugs. He said, okay, try it a few times, learn something, go on with life, with the real life, and don't hang on. In Zurich, when I was a student, there was Dietrich, who was one of my first advisors when I came in the 90s to the clinic, because he compared meditation, hypnosis, trance, sensory deprivation, overload, and psychedelics. And he developed over 10 years, you have to imagine, rating scales that tease out the common denominator of altered states, independent of the inducer, whether you go into hypnosis, whether you go into drugs, or sensory deprivation, samadhi tank, and all these things. There must be something that is cross-cultural, like Huxley had the idea. So Dietrich was a statistician, psychologist, tough guy, but very open, and he was a founder with Hoffman of the European Society for Consciousness Research, together with the famous Leuna from Göttingen. Okay, let's go. What are psychedelics? I don't know how you are informed, but I want to make it short. Most of the psychedelics are natural occurring compounds, like ayahuasca and DMT, psilocybin in mushrooms. And one is very interesting is this flower, you may have some in the garden, is an LSD derivative. It's just a really tiny change of one side group. So it's not so psychedelic, but we have studied that also in this early time of discovery in Switzerland. And then you have phenylethylamines like mescaline. They are structurally related through that gate, through that gate, through that gate, they, and this. So what does it mean? It is like a key that goes in the keyhole, but the side stranges are different, so they have different effects on the cell. You are aware that if you take these drugs, you may find out this is more ayahuasca, this is more LSD, if you're experienced, certainly. So it has been used in cultures in Mexico, for instance, psilocybin. And this is interesting. The Greeks, we always look to South America, but the Greeks, they had their own cults. Doesn't want to work. So just a short say about that. There's a temple near Athens to the goddess Demeter, or Demeter. There's a spring ritual where people took a cacaon, this is drunk, and it took a long time. Hoffman was already in pension, and with some archaeologists and with historian, he found that on different ray grasses, I don't know the English word for that, there is a little mushroom produces that compound. This compound is very LSD-like. So that's certainly historically interesting. So what are psychedelics from psychology? It's defined very simple in the Encyclopedia of Neuroscience. It's a compound that characteristically changes sensory perception, emotions, cognition and metacognition, that means self-referential awareness, and produces a kind of dreamlike states. So this, as I said, you can find with different techniques in Zen, Satori, Samadhi, Moshka, with dancing in the Islam, mystical rapture. So there are many forms. So in the center of the experience is the loosening of ego boundaries. What I try to show is the circle, the red circle. So you start over time to lose your boundaries, and you go into a kind of time traveling. So Dietrich, as I said, developed over years rating scales, and we found, or he found, and we refined that over the years, 5 basic dimensions. One we call oceanic self-boundlessness. So this having less going down with the ego experience, being in a blissful state. That's what you see on the left side is embodiment, positive emotions all the time in space. On the other side, we have something quite different. People also can go into a hellish state. We call that anxious ego dissolution. You use your self-boundaries and you get fear and anxiety, you can panic because you fear to lose control of what you get overwhelmed by emotions, by visuals, by visionary stuff, and losing the body feeling and the body dissolves. So this is roughly dose dependent. We say with psilocybin 25 milligrams, higher trigger more anxious ego dissolution than lower doses. So in clinical practice, all over the world now in the studies, people mostly use 20 to 25 milligrams of pure psilocybin. Then you have all the perception, acoustic alterations, and all the vigilance. That means the degree of alertness. Now, this positive oceanic boundlessness is often cited in the literature, in the newer papers, with this old term, mystical experience, going back to this, how people characterize that. And this mystical experience has also a feeling of unity. Everything is full of soul, is loss of the ego boundaries, and space-time. But you also have positive emotions, sacredness, and noetic quality. That means you get insight spontaneously without reflecting it. You just got on this experience and you got an insight, oh, I have this behavioral pattern, I have these emotions, without reflecting a lot. And that's what some people think we can take, give a little bit a higher dose, and change and transform. Now, having done many, many studies, I would say it's a nice idea, but mostly in clinical work, it doesn't really go like that. It goes for a few weeks, but not to transform personality. So what I want to show here is just that the stuff is dose dependent. These dimensions you see here, unity, spiritual experience, blissfulness, insight, disembodiment. The higher the dose, the more the space unfolds. Yeah, we can quite nicely measure. That's about 100 items where you have lines and you make a cross, how strong you personally experience that, and then it gets standardized through subjects. And it's good insight. Now, let's go to the next step, which is more interesting from a psychological point of view and also in relation to clinical applications. If you take a low dose, let's say 5 milligrams, the most you experience is an altered sense of perception. Things become more brilliant, more accentuated. You get absorbed. Slowly, you go like you're walking with the unfolding of little changes in your space. Colors become, maybe leaves of a tree start wobbling and little wandering around. Then, oh, it does what it wants. Sorry, it's not what I want. Now, then you go a little higher dose, and this is the next step. 10 to 12 milligrams. We can say that because we have treated 1,000 people at least, so we have a lot of data. So we can say 10 to 12 is, we go to that level, depending on dose. This is more that the drug activates deep structures in the brain responsible for emotion activation, arousal. And the visuals become more pronounced. Now you go up with the dose, 12 to 20. This is spooky. 12 to 20 is really, the imagery becomes enfolded. So you see people's faces transforming in animals, in other people, something very archaic, and so on. And then 20 to 25, I would say, you really have a kind of breakthrough, you lose your boundaries, and you are in the state. And the more experience you have, the faster you go into that. But only about 30% of people go really in this non-dualistic state. Now, what I want to show you here is something very important. We have talked a lot about pharmacology, so dose, but you see on the left side set and core processes. What we try to understand over years is how does the set, where the company where you take the room and the music and the friends around you shape the experience. What we found is statistically sound personality traits like openness. Open people who are curious for new things, they rather go in a positive experience. Then the other thing we have looked at is previous experience. Certainly that helps. But even you have a lot of experience, you can go in a bad trip if the situation is you had lots of stress days before. What we can measure is emotion regulation, which we see later with the meditation stuff, whether you accept emotions or you suppress. Absorption capacity helps to go into these states. And certainly trust, building trust with the therapist. So that's the common factor, including placebo effects, are all in one factor we call the common factor. The common factor is not the setting or all that stuff. It's the relationship between the people around you and you're going on a trip. So what people would like to understand is the quality of this state. Can you prepare people that they go rather in a positive state or in a negative state? So that's a lot of work now, because you want to use the drug in clinical practice. That means you like to see that it goes well and smooth and the patient has a positive experience. Now, our own experience in clinical practice again says sometimes the negative experience is not so bad because it's traumatic experience you have to go through. We see that later. So that's one thing. Can we predict the development of this state and how deep we go? Okay, we know quite a lot. We don't know everything, but roughly we can say with this dose, that environment, rather positive. And the other thing, it's a lot of research going on, is what of or which of these experiences, is it changing in emotion, in thinking pattern, is it the loss of self boundaries? What of these experiences drive a change in behavior that's clinically useful or for a healthy person? That's two different questions. A lot of people struggling just with this. Oh, I want to have a good trip. But relevant for using that, producing a medicine, which is really hard work because we work since years on, also bring it in clinical practice. To go through all the regulations is really hard. So I already said you have a baseline, you have improvement. What is driving this change? And now the Americans, and one study from England showed that the more you lose your boundaries in this positive experience, the more depressed symptoms goes down. And the Americans showed the same, that the stronger this mystical type experience, this is the positive self-dissolution is, the more anxiety goes down in patients with cancer, for instance. That was one of the studies in the 2016, who was quite pioneering. Now, newer studies show the therapeutic alliance is also very important to get an emotional breakthrough, to get a reduction of depression. And the other is the mystical type experience. There are two pairs of shoes. So, and this is statistics, it's not just wishful thinking. And this really indicates what we see without mathematics, that to go through the emotion is often so that people avoid to go through the negative emotions. And this is the question, how you prepare people to have a benefit on the long run. So I try to summarize this here. Drugs give you a recall of traumatic memories, activation of memories, can go into emotional breakthrough spontaneously. That's what people hope. But as you have a reduction of thinking pattern, you are less rigid. That can give you some insight, a revision, and you avoid normally negative thinking or back to traumatic experiences. You avoid that. And the drug can lower this resistance. And then you go in an oceanic boundlessness, let's say with the drug. One danger is you can also go in a self-inflation that we often see people that over-meditate, they are very special, they have a guru. And this is also a danger. It's really a danger with psychedelics too. We had many students coming into studies. I'm very special, I'm going through this psychedelic mood. And this is danger because you just change your belief system with another belief. It's not a maturation of your criticality. So the next thing is, if people don't have this emotional breakthrough, they have challenging experiences. And what we say is you have to go through that line also. You don't have to go into the really dreadful or anxious ego resolution. But this arm is even important to go in a state of non-duality. And this is a little bit difficult to explain. I showed that more with the Buddhistic monks, because the Buddhistic monks say, we train attentional capacity through focus attention. And the more we have that, we can go in an open awareness attention, which allows negative experiences, which allows negative emotions, but we don't attach to them. We just watch them, non-judgmental. So, nasty. If you want to go to the psychodynamics for psychiatrists, this was called the regression of the self, losing your self-boundaries, less control. And this is called often by words lowering defense, die Abwehr reduziert. Abwehr, this word defense, it's a wild use about all these things. But these are also, there's also quite a lot of clinical observation. It's effectively so that people have less strength to fight against the aversion of negative experiences and let them in and work through. So it's just old concepts, if you like them. Now, what can we do with science? With science, I already said, maybe it works, yeah. We can look at the receptor. How many are there? How much psilocybin is at the receptor? How do the neurons interact? And we can map the brain. How are they connected, these regions? How does a drug change that? Then we go deeper. We take genetic maps. How are the receptors distributed in the brain? Make models and can calculate the strength. That's one thing. But this is nice to have these maps, but a map without some additional subjective explanation of the patient is helpless, it's not the use. If you don't know the meaning of this connectivity changes here, people have to report, now I have visuals, now I have good emotions. So we map these brains with subjective experience. This was not really, people didn't like to see that we use rating scales and mapped in a space. People said, this is humbug. You have to measure something, memory capacity, attentional capacity. We have a lot of tests in the neuroscience for these things. So that's a third person perspective. Then you can talk about this change. But more interesting certainly is what's going on inside in addition to performance, you know. Okay, then we have MRI scanner, we have PET scanners, we have EEG, very fast. With EEG, we can shoot 1,000 pictures per second. So every millisecond, puff, 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 we get a lot of information. We use supercomputers because we cannot handle that. But the new thing we do is we use TMS, transmagnetic stimulation, to perturbate the brain. So that means it's like a laser beam. You say, we activate a region that is responsible that you move your finger. Okay, we give a laser beam and your finger moves. You don't do anything. You get moved through the directly acting on the brain, not from outside. So that's where we are today. I don't want to go too much into that, but we found out that this receptor, if you block that, the whole story is gone. You don't have any experiences anymore. Things goes down. The second important thing with psychedelics at the moment is what we predicted already 20 years ago, that there is a change in glutamate that activates receptors, other receptors, that make your brain more flexible. We call it neuroplastic. Neuroplasticity is increased. This increased flexibility of your brain on a neural basis, it's not psychological, it's really the brain is making. You see here, you give sugar, you give DOI, you give DMT, you give LSD, so the synapses, the neurons start to talk to each other, cross-talking, more synapses. When are you making more synapses? If you learn something. If you have a blank brain and you learn driving a car, your brain is making synapses. It's very easy. So, but when you drive a car, you start to do something. It's what I said, the patient or the taker has to do something with the open brain. It's nothing in the molecule. The LSD molecule has no information. You are the maker of your reality. Okay, now something people don't like to hear is that these psychedelics, they make this activation and this neuroplasticity, but there's another receptor where they also interact and they also gives rise to neuroplasticity. What does it mean? There's a whole pharmaceutical, how should I say, run that we're gonna to discover non-psychedelic psychedelics, because we don't need this bloody psychedelic experience. It's dangerous, it's maybe I'm anxious. I just want a flexible brain. So that means that now companies are interested. They never were interested in psychedelics before, because this is a big market, because you can push through patients. Just a little critical remark. Now, when it comes to the self-boundlessness, in fact, we really can show how much psilocybin sits in the brain in certain regions, and if more you have there, then you change your self-boundaries. Just an example. The other example I want to show is that the connectivity between brain regions changes over time. Here they get work closer together, these red regions with the yellow ones, the blue with the blue ones. So these things we can measure, and then we have seen that the more changes you have, for instance, the more you use your self-boundaries. But I don't want to go into this detail, what brain maps really relate to osteonic boundaries at that level. What we showed here is that the 2A receptor is the most important for the psychedelic experience. Then there's also a 1A that's important. And 7, we don't know the role of the 7 yet, but there are other binding opportunities in the brain. If you go over time, these changes in self-boundaries, when we go into details, a really complex network that also changes over time. Certain areas we call default mode network, these yellow ones, they are important if you think about yourself, and this is active, this network. This network is interconnected with other networks, which we don't have to go through, but you see over time, that's 3 hours, these things are changing. It's not so that you take the drug, you're in a state. It's a completely development of alterations. Now, if people go and publish, psychedelics is just a reduction of the default mode network activity, this is, yeah, it's okay for if you look at 70 minutes, but if you look at the process, it's not like that. It's much more complex. The problem is all these measure we have in high sophisticated science is not practical in clinical practice. It's nice to understand consciousness, but it's not what is useful. We need very simple measures to guide the clinical application. So this I want to skip. Now let's go a little bit more into a study and how we approach that with other approach. This was a study that was done in Munich, can't remember, 76, yeah. And artists, we also have done studies with musicians and artists because I'm playing drums, so I'm interested in music, all kind of music. And we were interested also in Zurich, how do psychedelics the brain change if the music is expanded so dramatically? And this guy had asked, how do people who get LSD change the perception of their body? Yeah, and you see the body, this is what I mean with this self-dissolution. And the self is very embedded in the body. So possibly when the baby on Earth and starts scrambling around, and touches the ground, he gets a first idea of a basic minimal self, and it starts with the body. Because if you ask somebody, who are you? People make like that. So it's so in your mind. And because when you lose your body sensation during the trip, some people get just afraid of that. Oh, where is my body gone? I once had an experience, look through the hand, where is my hand? Oh, it's just a waterfall. Yeah, how can you deal with that if you're not prepared? So anyway, and here is the maximum. And you know these people, Hundertwasser, or look at his pictures. He was in this LSD stuff. Or Hitlerich, I don't know all these guys, but I thought it's a very nice book with 100 pages, pictures how they worked on psychedelics. But it's hard to get the book. I had a long time to find it. But what I want to show here is the relationship between minimal body self. It's very deeply embedded in being here in presence through the body. So we can make the following. When you look at me now, you're not really surprised. I'm here and you look away, I'm here back again. So this is sensory learning. Oh, he's still talking. Oh, I get bored. You want something new, I want a coffee, or what the hell. But suddenly an elephant is standing here. He's like, God, what is gone? That's a prize, yeah? So the basic idea we have for neuroscience is, we call it predictive coding, that you constantly make a picture of the world. Because you have memories, you have learned this, you have learned that, you have expectation, and your expectation is always, the future is stable, yeah? And if something changes, that's interesting for the brain. If nothing, it's, you know, you hear a watch and it's like tick, tock, tick, tock. You hear that 5 times and then you don't hear it, but it's still here. Because your brain isn't interested anymore, it's boring. I know it. Don't come up with that. So anyway, we do that with sensations because we said it's a paradigm. If you touch your body, okay, it's here, it's me. And if it's changing, then you get alarmed, you get surprised. That's what you see here. You simulate your body with pulses, let's say 2 seconds, every 2 seconds, a certain intensity, and suddenly you change, and you give double pulses. And you go back and do that. If you give that, you make that 5 times, your brain is predicting, oh, next time I get touched again. But if it's changing, then you get surprised. And this is what we call predictive coding, how your brain encodes yourself, because it's your body. No, it works. Now, what is interesting is that the capacity to detect oneself really gets diluted on psychedelics, and this correlates with this disembodiment here, for instance, or this oceanic boundlessness. And you see that certain brain areas are responsible, frontal, thalamus, sensory cortex, that you detect yourself. And the psychedelic reduce that self-detection and makes you an open space. So that's a model for how the brain is referencing on itself in terms of a body sensation. And you see the more this capacity goes down, the more you get in a state of unity and disembodiment. As we also have the feeling of being connected if that capacity of a brain goes down. So what this shows that this very complex construct, psychologically, we ask people, we make ratings and they get this scale, oceanic boundlessness. It has an equivalent in a test. It's not so simple that you can get criticized, oh, he rated himself. Here is one model of many models we apply to take. There's another one, we can make that with music. You give different tones and you switch the tone and your brain has to adapt. And this adaptation has to be very precise. Also, if you hear Beethoven, da-da-da, you would say, da, da-da-da, da. You know that, but I make da-da-da-dee. What's with Beethoven today? And this is exactly what I want to explain here. Then you get surprised, and that is what you detect. And all the other stuff is not important. And this predictive coding, you do that also with your worldview. You go through the world and you've learned this and that, and you, this is one from the south in Switzerland. We say, this is an Italian guy. Yeah, very typical. So we have expectation, we have models in the brain, and we superimpose these models. And this is what the brain does. And the psychedelics bring this capacity down, that your brain gets more open. The precision of this training goes away and opens you, gives you a chance to adapt to new situations. This is just another thing. This is too complex now, I don't want to say, but this is what you see. This is a third of a second. We stimulate the brain from outside with this beamer stuff, and the neurons react, and the brain, we can measure that. And what we're running here is, you often hear psychedelics increase is an enhanced state of an expansion of consciousness. And this is a very complex measure, which I cannot go into this bloody mathematical details. It's a measure of information processing at the highest level, how brain areas interact in milliseconds when we stimulate it from outside. And you see this is just a short sequence. But what you can measure with that, now we give a pulse and you see which neurons, this is a third of a second, gets activated. And you get an idea, this is on the psilocybin. Oh, it's gone. Maybe I can show it to you. Just to get an idea what we do. Now, we give a bump here. The whole brain starts to work together. And now on the psilocybin, we have something coming back. We don't see that without psilocybin. So the brain gets other ways to work together under the psychedelics. And the degree of changes we measure in terms of information density, also die Dichte der Information. And people always speak about entropy. Psychedelics increase entropy, freedom, complexity. Entropy is just a physical measure. It has no meaning, you know. Don't get confused. Information expressed as a mathematical term in entropy is a number, but it's not a meaning. And people now talk a lot of, psychedelics increase entropy. We haven't seen that. If we probe the brain, there's no more entropy. It works different. Okay, How long? Okay. And in resting state, there is more entropy. Okay, let's go to the thing I wanted to show mostly. This is such a retreat in the Swiss mountain with very experienced symbols, at least 6,000 hours with different retreats, and they used Zen and Vipassana in this first study. They had a very structured 4-day training, and they get brain scanned, we measure the depth of meditation depths and how mindful they are, how open, how the inner awareness is, acceptance. Then they get psilocybin or placebo that have another 2 meditation days, and the brain gets investigated. The question is, what are the predictors? What of these things they can do and they're really trained is like attention, being in the presence, being non-judgmental, accept your emotion, accept your thoughts, don't suppress emotions, reappraise, give them a new value, decentering, and let it go. So the question was, do very experienced Zen Buddhists who are very trained in that navigate to the psychedelic space in a different way? Can they say, okay, I have all this loss of the normal world, but I go through that. And then we looked later, 4 months later, was there a benefit for them? Did they change? Did something change? They are already trained. And did the brain change? Does mindfulness improve? Now, just one thing. On the first day, they were on meditation. On day 4, the psychedelic people who got psilocybin, but deeper in meditation states, in the depth. What you see here, this is the placebo group. They also have some blissful, have some unity feelings, 50, but what you see is extreme, 70 spiritual experience, and inside, the red are the one with psilocybin, and the blue are the one without psilocybin. Both are very trained for years. So we were very surprised that such people have still something, they learn still something from psychedelics, or they have some, let's say, deepening of their experience. Now the green here, not to lose too much time, I don't have much left over, is the same dose in a lab situation. And you see the environment plays a role. Yeah? It was in a sando in the mountains alone, a silent retreat, doing work, meditate every day. What you see here is these are the people with psychedelics in deep meditation, but you also have 3 of the guys who had a mystical experience because they had 20 years of meditation training. So this is not surprising. Then you see that in the EEG, which I can skip now, we did a study where people were hooked up with EEG to have ideas about the brain, and what we found is maybe if people are into meditation, gamma is really increased, theta is down, and alpha is down. These are the 2 famous things because this gives a hint they are in an open space, less memory work, and so on. What we found also is that the experienced meditators were much deeper into these states than the beginners. The beginners, they had something like in a lab person. And the beginners also were more tired than the experienced and have a little bit more, double so much anxiety sometimes. This just shows that experience is important. Now, what we found is after the retreat, people had an improved capacity to be in the presence, to be in the present moment, non-judgmental, acceptable. And the other variable we have looked at is acceptance, as it is highly increased, significant statistically. This is a placebo guy. After the retreat, a little better because he was in a retreat for 7 days, but this is markedly better. Now the beginners, they have a trend to go up, to be better, but not yet because they don't have the skill the skills of a really experienced meditator. Now, if you do all the retreats together and we look a little deeper, we found for this mysticism, this introvertive is important, this loss of ego, time, space, and ineffability. The unity is also the extrovertive mysticism, we call that. So what is important? Openness, presence, brings in the presence, help them to go deeper than not psilocybin, trait mindfulness, acceptance, and that is interesting. People that can better give in a situation a new value, they can reflect about it and change the view on things. And this is what I showed with this body experiment, that you psychedelics change the rigidity, that you superimpose always your view on things, your worldview. People who are better in reappraisal, they have deeper experience that helps to keep down anxiety, as our anxious ego dissolution is much smaller if you have that skill. So skip. The last point I want to show is that if we look at these people 4 months later, we did the brain scan after the retreat 2 days. We found changes in this default mode network, which is responsible for self-reflection, thinking about oneself. And the more you have been in a positive state, the more this connection between anterior regions in the brain and posterior in the default mode, the more they get loosened, the more you were in that positive state, the more change you have in the brain. So that we can go. Now, what's that good for? So your brain is changed in terms of how regions work together, and this is really interesting. You had a very good trip that leads to a change in the connectivity between these brain areas, and that really nicely, the more you have this change in the brain, the more you have persistence experiences, the more you take away from that retreat or from that experience over time. And you see, you have, for instance, your appreciation of life is much increased, acceptance of self, concern for the world is less material, you're less material, concern for others is increased, spirituality. And this is interesting. Having had psilocybin or not, you think more about death. What that means, I don't know. Anyway, what's driving these changes, this is 4 months later, is having a strong feeling of unity or being connected that drives concerns for others. That's very interesting. Positive affects, if the trip was good, that appreciation of life, you estimate life and question of meaning, and having more, how should I say it? It's hard to explain. The spirituality we measure, I was embedded in something that's bigger than me, and it's good. It's not a religious term. It's therefore we call it spirituality. You feel embedded in a broader sense of being here. So the life is spiritual or is meaningful. So that drives this self-acceptance and question of meaning. That's very interesting, that you get a new impact, how meaningful your life is. Yeah, I think we went through. If you want to read it in my new book. Since it's in Chinese, I get hundreds of mail per day. It's tough, but you know how it takes psychedelics, you learn it. Also in old age, like me. Or you take a look at the English version. So I wish to thank my team. I couldn't have done it without all these wonderful people over the years. There are many, many more. But these are the people I currently still interact, and certainly a lot of universities and foundations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for this insightful talk. Now we have, of course, time for questions. Maybe I'll just jump right in with something talking about psychedelic therapy and the application of psychedelics and mindfulness practices. Where do you see the interface? I saw a lot of the effects of acceptance, appreciation of death, whatever that means. Do you think mindfulness practices, meditation specifically, should be part of psychedelic therapy?
Yes, I think. I think that what the study shows, and other studies we have done, is that the skill to focus, to train, to focus on something that you can do very easy. We have an app for patients. They do body scan, breathing, 10 minutes per day before they even go to the psychedelics. So they come to the clinic, they learn that, and then they have the app. We see, do they do it, or somebody else for them can control. But this is something, focused attention. What does this help? Focused, to have more capacity helps to go through the more negative thing. If you cannot keep together a sense of self, it's very illusionary. It is not so in the psychedelic state that you have no self. You have an expanded view on things. Sometimes the self is so minimal, but you're still from a perspective. If you don't have that, then you get more psychotic, get split off. Okay, but the focused attention helps the meditator to go into a process of self-questioning or requiring. And that's the next step. Okay, now the patient becomes more, emotions come in, they're not so nice, they get stressed, they don't want to see the aversion. To go through this aversion acceptance training, that's the other point in mindfulness training, that you learn to accept your thought, basic emotions, and thoughts is maybe a higher order thing, but emotion. And the most aversion or the most defense patients have if the emotions become very wobbly, this and that, and don't want to see that, they start listening to the music, they don't go into the process. Okay, so if I think about mindfulness-based meditation, first, the focus you can train a patient. Then, let's say, acceptance and being present is a little harder. Normally, a training goes at least 4 weeks or 2 months, Kabat-Zinn, if you want to like that. There's so many trainings. But this, at least based on hard data, helps to go deep into the state and not to go away from the distressing things. And if you look at all the publications that are out now in psychedelic research, in clinical practice with depressed, with one exception, Carbonara, who showed that going through negative experience, not the intensity, but the duration is also useful. And all the others always come up as the positive experience, which certainly is a bias, because mostly, I don't know how close they have information from these patients. Nobody publishes that. But if you do clinical practice, and it's everyday work that you see patients, often patients come to us and say, oh, this was wonderful, but it's just the beginning. I felt what you mean with going through something and working through, and let it go. And it's also what I learned, if you have students in studies, they're really trained in all kind of capacities with computers, being fast, and having a high attentional load, and so on. And this is not the same population like patients. If you say a student relax, do this and do that, but if you have a normal patient who is now has his social problems, he's depressed, he's isolated, he has anxiety, you can say, "Yeah, please relax." There will be something very, I don't know what. You make a lot of expectations you cannot hold. So back to your question, I'm convinced that a combination of training to have a higher focus of attention and on the other side, a higher capacity to go inside. It's so hard for many people listen to music. When we had studied people, what is music doing with your brain? Many people that do sing and blah, 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 but they do not go into the music, you know. And this is a psychedelics very similar. It's tricky a skill to get it out, what they can offer you.
So I understand mindfulness skills or practices as crucial navigational competences in the subject.
Yeah, another thing is there's also a training between emotion and cognition that balance that out. There's also training which you can learn in 4 weeks or so.
Also, of course, to the audience, it's possible to ask questions. So if you just let me know if there are questions online. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm both a trauma therapist specialized in developmental trauma and a sound therapist over here. And I was wondering how the ability or inability to connect to ourselves and to others is kind of influencing both the ability to be open-minded and mindful, and at the same time the ability to really experience the possibilities that all psychedelics have. What are your experiences regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you practice this kind of being in the moment or being present to the moment, has two things. On the one hand, it allows you to question yourself. On the other hand, it allows you less thinking about something, being in the moment, particularly in the psychedelic states where time goes away and you think, oh, it takes years. You look on your clock and you see, oh, it was 2 minutes, and you thought it was 1 year. So being in that moment allows you to experience yourself in a different way, because it goes down in terms of what you think about yourself, and you do not reflect it. Is it that what you want to know? So that's what I hook up with presence.
Yes, and the ability to stay fully present is deeply influenced by the degree of your traumatization. Okay. And I'm wondering how this degree of traumatization is related to your studies about psychedelics.
I see. Yeah. You run away from yourself, or whatever it is. We don't have really looked at that so in detail. What we see is that the less you reflect yourself, the more you got in that flow, the more you don't attend, or you're less connected or linked to this traumatic self. So if you replace quasi the old experience with a new one, maybe it's a replacing. It's not even, I think from memory research, people often think that if you go through memories, bad memories or traumatized memories, that they become smaller and smaller and smaller. They become less important. So you build up something new. What I meant being in the present, and you have the experience from the psychedelic, oh, the self goes away. I have less, I don't need less effort, because I just can be that this is a learning process. So maybe it goes like that. But you know, there's a lot of theory, and you cannot measure all these things. It will show with time. Is the combination of mindfulness or another form of support to let it go in the end. Less aversion. Acceptance theory is one, commitment and acceptance and commitment on this. Mindfulness has an addition of being more attention and open up. That will help. I'm convinced. That's my view.
Someone online is asking if you could elaborate more on the 4-week training between emotion and cognition.
Yeah, it's a new kind of development now. I observed is that people get in a process where they have to explain their emotions not rationally, but not saying I'm like this, I'm like that, and just go from another perspective to explain their emotions. And then they learn that they often just label their own emotions. They say, I'm bad today, but you should get skill to say, I'm badly, so not, I feel bad, so what you lay into this process of emotion. It's really hard to, it's mentalizing. Maybe you know it from different people in Germany who developed that from out of psychoanalysis, that you become more skillful to go in an emotional state instead of through a kind of expressing you emotionally and not describing you. It's a little, I don't follow it, but I found it's very interesting, because with the psychedelics, we often have the people say, I experienced this and that, and it's really from outside, instead from inside. I was like that. It's always an I who experiences something, not a description of what we think about us. And this mentalizing, this kind of training, I started as in depression now, as a book came out a year ago or so. And I found it very interesting when I went through that there could be something that you can learn relatively fast.
Thank you. I have a question which is maybe a bit methodological, but I think it also fits nicely with the previous question of the degree of traumatization, how people go through the experience. And you mentioned you can't really measure that. And I understand with most of the studies, they are based on questionnaires, which are assessing the experience afterwards on a scale. But have you considered using a microphenomenological approach, which is the more in-depth?
Sometimes we used it in the retreats. We had some psychologists who were trained in that. I'm personally, I'm not. So it's exactly what I mean. You have to follow up persons relatively close and time-wise. So most of the ratings are after an experience or in the middle of an experience. But microphenomenology would be really, helpful.
What does that mean for people who don't know microphenomenology?
This is a certain training, a certain kind of how you ask people, how you rate the experience in smaller steps than what you normally do with psychological rating scales. So I'm not really into that, but maybe the lady knows it better.
It's if I may, it's a method of interview. It's kind of studying the experience from a second-person perspective. So you get trained into interviewing people in a specific way that really measure the structure of their experience moment by moment. And it just came to my mind, especially to your previous point, that perhaps more traumatized people would have more ruptured or interrupted going in and out of of this, I don't know, immersive psychedelic experience. And in this way, it could be measured, but it's very time consuming because you interview people and very deeply, second by second, and try to extract the structure of their experience.
Yeah, I also think in the end it's again more a research stuff thing and less not really useful. What we do, we have, if we treat patients, we see them really regularly. So we give the drug, we see them every third day. We have a classical psychotherapeutic stance. We look at transfer. Even people are not psychoanalysts. We were trained in psychodynamics. We understand forces, psychic forces. I still believe in the ego forces, even it doesn't come up here, but it's how we see how people react. It's just a label in the end, how you say, oh, it's more the ego drive, or it's more some brain structures. I don't care that too much. In the end, the experience is important. The trust and how you go as a patient. And what we have seen, how much the patient is really committed. There's so many patients that just think, let's get 1 or 2 sessions and my full life is changed. And this is rubbish, because most of the patients who are in a situation that they need therapy because maybe they haven't responded to other therapies, or are most often in a social situation which is so hindering to development that you would have to take them out of their environment and open up a new world for them. And that we can't do. We are not magicians. So many of the things are overrated or exaggerated. We have to stay on ground, what psychedelics can do. I know people don't like to hear that, but it's reality.
One more question, the last one, and then.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk. I'm psychotherapist at Ovid Clinics next door.
Cool.
And I'm also a meditation trainer as well for Mind Foundation. And I'm not sure, there's this study from Otto Simonson, and he was stressing that a different form of meditation, to be more specific, loving kindness meditation, can be a very helpful tool for psychedelic experiences, especially in dealing with adverse effects.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to hear your opinion about the aspect of being a very self-referential kind of meditation practice. How does that, how is that helpful balance in maybe loosening one's self-boundaries in psychedelic experiences? Is it a contradiction? Is it maybe a positive interplay? Maybe you have some comments on that.
Yeah, what I realized when I talk with different people from Buddhistic schools, which I know best, like Zen or Vipassana and these things, people often are confused and think in this deep state of, let's say, being connected, unity, oneness, you have no self. It's really hard to speak about egoless, ego dissolution. It's just the normal boundaries who are so narrow gets away and you don't think about that and you're more in a state. But the trick is, what every Buddhist would say who is really experienced is they're highly, in the open meditation, open awareness, they're highly trained through the first learning the attentional focused meditation to keep things together. This is not so that there's nothing there. There is a perspective on things without boundaries. Now, people say, you get insight and into emptiness, and you can read the word void in psychedelic research, delere. That's such another bullshit. Sorry. It means when you have learned through the Buddhistic self-inquiry that yourself is a construct. This is really disturbing. This is painful because there's no Peter, there's no Max, and there's no this. There's no thing. You constantly, through consciousness, are creating the cosmos and the world. You can take a physical language, okay, you have the physical cosmos, a biological, a sociological, a Buddhistic, but all these things are made. And what the Buddhist means, emptiness, you start to realize that this is self-made, and therefore it's empty. There is no car, there is no plant. These are all names, and if you have another eye, you would see the plant together with some oxygen molecules. It would look quite different. So that is what people think what emptiness is. And this emptiness goes through the state of selflessness, but not having a perspective. It can be very minimal. I don't believe in this non-duality that you are the whole cosmos. Okay, if you can create up this illusion, it's nice. But the only scientific explanation that something you can look from outside and from inside is in the end a kind of superposition. But it's a physical concept. It's not a existential, but people like to say, oh, let's think about quantum theory and psychedelics. Forget all that. You cannot measure it. We have no idea about it. It's nice to have these anecdotes, but this being in this non-dual state, you would have to be in a superposition. Maybe it's possible. We don't know.
Yeah, thank you very much, Franz, for this. I also think the Insight Forum is a place for beautiful poetry. So maybe another round of applause for Franz Vollenweider.